Every so often, life presents us with moments of quiet strength that transform our perspective. Picture this: in the stillness of the night, you notice a familiar face amid the soft hum of a humble market, and in that fleeting encounter, a hidden struggle unfolds, a story that tugs at your heart. Where are you watching from tonight? If these soulful journeys resonate with you, subscribe to the Motivation for Success channel for more inspiring tales of hope and resilience. Keanu Reeves had always found solace in the ordinary, the understated moments of everyday life. Every night without fail, just as the world outside slowed into a quiet rhythm, he would step into a modest, 24-hour market nestled in the heart of Metro City. The neon glow of streetlights and the soft hum of distant traffic formed the backdrop of his nightly ritual. On this particular night, however, an unexpected encounter would open his eyes to a hidden reality, a glimpse into a life filled with silent battles and unwavering sacrifice. That evening, as Keanu entered the market, the cool, damp air greeted him with the inviting scent of freshly baked bread mingling subtly with the crisp, clean aroma of disinfectant. He navigated the aisles with familiar ease, his measured footsteps resonating softly on the gleaming floor. Everything about the place, its orderly shelves laden with everyday necessities, had become a comforting ritual, until tonight changed everything. As he casually wandered past his usual route, an unexpected scene at the checkout stopped him in his tracks. There, at the end of her shift, was an elderly employee, a woman whose quiet presence had always blended into the background, unnoticed. Until tonight, he had never truly seen her for who she was. She was a slight, almost fragile figure clad in a well-worn blue blouse that draped loosely over her delicate frame. Her graying hair, neatly tied back, framed eyes that bore the silent weight of countless untold stories. Those tired eyes, sparkling with a mix of sorrow and resilience, revealed a depth of struggle that went far beyond the long hours she spent behind the counter. In her hand, she clutched a small plastic bag with an almost reverent grip, as if it contained something invaluable. Every unsteady, measured step she took towards the side exit spoke of both fatigue and a quiet determination. In that moment, something stirred within Keanu, a powerful, inexplicable empathy that compelled him to follow her. As she slipped into the shadowed embrace of the darkened street, the cacophony of the city faded away. All that remained was the gentle, rhythmic patter of her footsteps and the soft, distant murmur of the night. It was then that Keanu realized she was more than just an employee finishing her shift, she was a silent warrior, bearing a burden far heavier than a simple bag of groceries, a battle fought in the quiet corners of everyday life that few ever witnessed. Under the shroud of night, as the brilliant city lights slowly dimmed and the once bustling avenues gave way to narrow, shadowed streets, Keanu kept a respectful distance behind the woman. With every step, the familiar urban landscape transformed before his eyes, lively, brightly lit boulevards gradually receded into secluded alleys where even time seemed to pause in silent reverence. The rhythmic echo of her footsteps on the worn pavement resonated like a steady heartbeat, a quiet reminder of life's relentless march. The gentle hum of a distant siren, the soft murmur of a cooling breeze, and even the occasional rustle of leaves combined into a delicate symphony, as if nature itself were silently bearing witness to an unfolding human drama. Her pace was unhurried, not because she was savoring a leisurely stroll, but as if each step was a deliberate struggle against an invisible, crushing weight. Her eyes, shadowed with fatigue yet gleaming with an indefinable determination, hinted at a strength born of hardship. Although Keanu had seen her many times during his routine visits to the market, tonight, every nuance of her presence seemed magnified. The careful way she clutched a battered plastic bag, the measured, almost labored rhythm of her steps, and the soft, pensive look that played in her tired eyes stirred within him a profound curiosity. Who was she beyond the predictable confines of the store? What untold story lay hidden behind her weary expression and the fragile grip on that simple bag? For nearly 40 minutes, Keanu trailed her through desolate streets where crumbling buildings and forgotten urban corners painted a somber backdrop. The once vibrant city had given way to a quiet tapestry of decay and resilience. Finally, she halted in front of a small, dilapidated trailer parked beside an abandoned lot. Its metal exterior, corroded and marked by the passage of time, bore peeling paint and rust, a visual testament to years of neglect and unspoken struggle. From within the trailer, a solitary, flickering light beckoned like a fragile beacon amid the darkness, inviting a closer look into a world hidden away from prying eyes. Peering through a grimy, smeared window, Keanu's heart clenched at the scene before him. Inside the cramped space of the trailer, two small children lay on a threadbare mattress, surrounded by only a few worn blankets and a rickety table that barely held its shape. The room exuded an aura of humble perseverance, a quiet resilience born of necessity. With deliberate care, the elderly woman stepped inside and reached into the cherished plastic bag. From it, she withdrew a modest piece of bread and a small container of thin, watery soup. In an instant, the children's eyes, wide with a mingling of hunger and hope, lit up at the sight of the meager sustenance. With a tender smile that barely concealed her own exhaustion, she carefully divided the scarce food between them, each measured gesture speaking volumes about the silent sacrifices she made each day. Every morsel she offered was not merely a meal, it was a lifeline, a small act of defiance against the overwhelming tide of hardship that threatened to engulf their lives. In that fragile moment, as the quiet determination in her eyes met the innocent hope in the children's gaze, Keanu felt an undeniable stirring within him, a deep recognition of the quiet heroism unfolding right before his eyes. In that quiet, defining moment, Keanu's perception shifted irrevocably. This was no ordinary journey home after another grueling shift. The woman, whom he would come to know as Mrs. Lawson, was not simply an employee concluding another exhausting night at the market. She was a selfless caregiver, silently enduring hardship to ensure that two fragile lives would not be ravaged by hunger. The realization was both heart-wrenching and profoundly uplifting. Here was a soul who, despite toiling for endless hours for a meager minimum wage that barely kept her afloat, never wavered in her determination to nurture and safeguard the ones she loved. Keanu lingered in the shadows, his heart pounding with a blend of sorrow and steely resolve. Every minute detail was etched into his memory, the delicate tremor in Mrs. Lawson's hand as she carefully divided a piece of bread, the quiet fortitude in her eyes that belied her overwhelming fatigue, and the soft, almost inaudible words of reassurance she murmured to the children as if to promise them a better tomorrow. Each gesture spoke volumes of a life marred by injustice and inequality, a stark reminder that behind even the most ordinary interactions can lie tales of immense sacrifice, resilience, and overlooked heroism. That night, unable to banish the haunting image from his mind, Keanu returned home, though sleep proved elusive. As he lay in the stillness of his room, the scene replayed like an endless loop of dignified suffering and silent courage. He could still hear the distant echo of the children's hopeful laughter, a sound mingled with the soft promises of a brighter future, and he was haunted by the unspoken agony hidden behind Mrs. Lawson's tired, yet determined smile. The weight of what he had witnessed pressed heavily upon him, a constant, urging call to action that he knew he could no longer ignore. The next day, the memory of that night stirred within Keanu like a persistent echo. Determined to understand the full measure of Mrs. Lawson's struggle, he returned to the market. The bright afternoon sun cast long shadows over the busy streets of Metro City, a stark contrast to the somber night he had just experienced. Inside the market, the usual hum of activity filled the air as shoppers moved busily through the aisles. Yet Keanu's focus remained on the one person whose plight had so deeply moved him. He sought out the store manager, a man whose demeanor, usually courteous and efficient, betrayed a hint of reluctance when questioned about Mrs. Lawson. "Excuse me, Keanu began, his voice calm yet resolute, "I would like to ask a few questions about one of your long-standing employees." The manager, Mr. Anderson, glanced up with recognition in his eyes. "Ah, Mr. Reeves. How can I assist you?" he replied, his tone polite but tinged with unease. "I'm referring to Mrs. Lawson," Keanu continued. "She's been with you for over a decade, isn't she? I hear she's one of your most dedicated workers." Mr. Anderson hesitated, his eyes darting briefly before he nodded. "Yes, she's been with us for more than 10 years. Always on time, always putting in extra shifts without complaint." Keanu's gaze sharpened. "And what is her pay? Does she receive any benefits?" he asked, the question carrying more weight than a casual inquiry. The manager shifted uncomfortably. "She earns the standard minimum wage for part-time work," Mr. Anderson explained with a forced smile. "Unfortunately, that means she isn't eligible for full benefits. She works long hours, but it's still only part-time." The word struck Keanu like a blow. Mrs. Lawson, the woman who selflessly devoted herself to caring for her family, was forced to endure long, grueling hours without the basic rights that would offer her any sense of security. The injustice was palpable, a bitter reminder of a system that valued profit over human dignity. Leaving the store with a heavy heart, Keanu stepped out into the glaring light of day. The ordinary bustle of the city now felt tainted by the weight of Mrs. Lawson's struggle. Determined to do more than simply observe, he resolved to help in a way that would bring lasting change, not just temporary relief. That evening, as dusk settled over Metro City, Keanu found himself once again outside the market. This time, he wasn't content to remain an anonymous witness. Hidden in the soft glow of a street lamp, he watched the side door from which Mrs. Lawson usually emerged. Moments later, she appeared, a slight, weary figure in a faded blue blouse, the familiar plastic bag clutched close to her chest. Gathering his courage, Keanu stepped forward slowly, careful not to startle her. As she passed by, he spoke in a gentle, unassuming tone, "Good evening, Mrs. Lawson." Startled, she paused and turned, her eyes widening in cautious recognition. "Good evening, Mr. Reeves," she replied softly, her voice tinged with both surprise and reserve. "Please, call me Keanu," he said kindly, offering a warm smile. "I just wanted to say hello. I see you here every night, and I thought it was time we spoke properly." There was a brief, silent pause as she regarded him, a mixture of uncertainty and quiet gratitude. I do see you often," she admitted, adjusting the worn strap of her bag. "I've always appreciated your kind nods, but I never expected anyone to take the time to talk." Keanu's eyes were sincere as he continued, "You work so late, and I can only imagine how exhausting it must be. I just want you to know that someone cares, and if you ever need anything, I'm here." Mrs. Lawson's eyes softened for a moment, a fragile smile forming on her lips. "Thank you, Keanu," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's just. I do what I must, day after day." The exchange, simple yet profound, lingered in the cool night air. For the first time, Mrs. Lawson sensed that she was not invisible, someone had noticed her sacrifices and was willing to help. And for Keanu, the decision was now irrevocable, he would not allow the silence of indifference to persist. Over the next few days, Keanu dedicated himself to finding a way to ease Mrs. Lawson's burden. He knew that merely offering temporary financial help wouldn't suffice. What she needed was a stable foundation, a place where she and her children could finally experience the warmth of home. With quiet determination, Keanu reached out to community organizers, local charities, and trusted real estate agents in Metro City. He explained the situation without fanfare, driven solely by a deep conviction that kindness must be met with decisive action. After days of careful planning and discreet negotiations, Keanu found a modest yet comfortable house in a safe neighborhood, a stark contrast to the rundown trailer that had become the symbol of Mrs. Lawson's struggle. The house, though small, had character: warm wooden floors, sunlit rooms, and a small garden where children could play without fear. Every detail was attended to with the care of someone who truly understood the meaning of compassion. Keanu ensured that the house was fully paid for, that utilities would be covered for the foreseeable future, and even arranged for a small trust fund to guarantee that Mrs. Lawson would never again have to worry about putting food on the table. His approach was unpretentious: no headlines, no cameras. Just a quiet, powerful act of solidarity, intended to restore dignity to a woman who had given everything for the sake of her children. That evening, under the soft glow of twilight, Keanu returned to the market one final time. Mrs. Lawson was finishing her shift as usual, the exhaustion in her eyes now mingled with a glimmer of cautious hope. As she stepped out into the cool night air, there he stood, waiting with an envelope in his hand, a simple gesture laden with immeasurable meaning. "Mrs. Lawson," Keanu called gently as she approached. She paused, her eyes reflecting a mix of curiosity and weariness. "I have something for you," he said, extending the envelope with a calm assurance. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted it, unfolding the paper with delicate care. As her eyes scanned the words, a hush fell over her. In that moment, the envelope became a symbol, a promise of a new beginning, a tangible testament to the fact that someone had seen her, understood her struggle, and was determined to help. Tears welled in Mrs. Lawson's eyes as she whispered, This is for me." Her voice broke with a mixture of disbelief and deep, raw emotion. "Now you have a home, Mrs. Lawson, a real home where you can rest, where your children can laugh without fear," Keanu replied softly, his tone filled with a quiet conviction. For a long moment, she stood motionless, absorbing the reality of the gift that had been offered to her. Then, overwhelmed by gratitude, she burst into gentle, heartfelt sobs, a release of all the sorrow and burden that had weighed on her for so long. Keanu stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone anymore," he assured her. "We all deserve a chance to live with dignity, to be seen and cared for." In that simple yet transformative moment, a new chapter began for Mrs. Lawson and her children. The next day, as they moved into the modest house, laughter and joy filled the rooms. The children ran from room to room, their laughter echoing like a promise of better days, while Mrs. Lawson stood at the doorway, her eyes shimmering with tears of hope. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Keanu's smile was gentle, his reply measured and heartfelt. "There's no need for thanks," he said softly. "Sometimes the greatest battles are fought in silence. Today, you've shown that even in the quietest moments, there is strength, love, and the power to change the world." As the sun set on Metro City that day, a profound calm had settled over everything. The story of Mrs. Lawson was not just about hardship or sacrifice, it was about the transformative power of compassion, the resilience of the human spirit, and the belief that even a single act of kindness can ignite a cascade of hope. If you found this story as moving as I did, take a moment to reflect on the message it carries, that in a world that often overlooks the struggles of the everyday, every one of us has the power to make a difference. Sometimes, it's the quiet, unassuming heroes among us who remind us of what truly matters. Let this be a call to action, to notice, to care, and to act with compassion in your own life. Wherever you are watching from, let this story inspire you to seek out those hidden moments of need and to extend a hand whenever you can. And if you believe in the power of these quiet acts of kindness, subscribe to the Motivation for Success channel for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Remember, every small act of love and compassion creates ripples that can transform the darkest of nights into dawns filled with promise. Let Mrs. Lawson's journey be a reminder: we all have the strength to lift others, to change lives, and to build a world where hope triumphs over despair. Thank you for joining me on this journey tonight. Reflect on this story, share it with someone who might need a little light in their life, and take a moment to think about what you can do to help someone in need. In the end, it's these stories of silent courage that pave the way for a future where every human being is seen, valued, and given the chance to thrive. The lesson here is simple yet profound: never underestimate the power of a single act of kindness. When we open our eyes to the struggles that hide in plain sight, we find the strength to make a meaningful change. Mrs. Lawson's quiet perseverance, despite a system that let her down, teaches us that hope and compassion are the true foundations of a better tomorrow. So, as you close your eyes tonight, let the gentle echoes of this story inspire you to be that change. Be vigilant, be compassionate, and above all, remember that every act of kindness is a step towards a more just and caring world. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment and share your thoughts. What small act of kindness can you commit to today? Let's start a conversation and build a community of support and hope. Together, we can ensure that no one is left unseen or unheard. Thank you for being here, and may you carry this light forward into your own life. Stay inspired, stay compassionate, and remember, every day is an opportunity to make a difference.